actually Viking dreadlocks, and I wear them to better connect with my own ancestral lineage.
Hello, my friend. We don't really have much evidence to suggest that Scandinavian people from that time period wore locked hair. If anything, they likely braided their hair, which is of course different. What we do have evidence of is that they loved combing their hair, as well as washing their hair regularly and bathing regularly. Now, other native communities around Europe likely did either braid their hair or even lock their hair, like the Celtic tribes. Also, do remember that Viking is not an ethnicity. If you're saying you're of Viking descent, what you're saying is that you're of Scandinavian descent. Viking was an occupation. It's sort of like saying I'm ethnically a farmer. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to connect with your Scandinavian heritage. Still a very cool heritage to have.
I think it's time we talk about Vikings and dreadlocks. I have seen countless people talking about how they can have braided or dreaded hair because they are Vikings. First of all, no, you are not a Viking. You may be of Scandinavian descent, but until you get in your longship and raid Canada, you're not a Viking. And look, I love the show Vikings, and this hairstyle is iconic in that show, but we have no historical evidence saying Vikings ever looked like this. In fact, we know they probably didn't, because they combed their hair regularly and it wouldn't tangle. We know the Vikings had long hair, beards, and man buns, but not dreadlocks. Now, as for wild hairstyles, this reverse mullet actually was a thing. Probably the most historically accurate haircut in the show Vikings. But this stuff is fantasy, and that's okay. There is some evidence and historical accounts that suggest that some European groups did have braided or dreadlocked hair, but not the Vikings. You do what you want to do with your hair, but the Vikings didn't have dreads.
I have. Most historians will say they probably didn't because, again, like I've said to so many people on here, one of their favorite things were their grooming kits. They were constantly combing, grooming, shaving, and bleaching their hair with lye. Also, there was no culture called the Vikings. They were the Norse people. The only people who will find results that will say, like, Vikings had dreadlocks are people who, one, use the term Vikings, and two, want them to have the same image as their whole Skyrim fantasy. The proper picture of a Norseman back then would have been a man who was well-groomed, clean, with short or shaven facial hair, and probably a bowl cut. You can find this with like old illustrations. You can find this with pretty much their grooming habits that were talked about in lots of different texts. Only Germanic culture that had dreadlocks were the Celts, and theirs were more like spikes. So they looked like the island boys.
The time it took me to make this cup of coffee, I was able to prove that Vikings had dreadlocks and...
Hey, Professor of Archaeology here. The stitch is correct. The original video is wrong. We've got no conclusive evidence of Viking dreads. Those are elaborate hairstyles, some of them pre-Viking.
Yeah, look, y'all stop telling me about the Vikings and their dreadlocks. Ain't nobody...
Almost every culture has a history with locks. Everybody doesn't just admire and get their ideas from us, but the Vikings have their own side of TikTok. You should go check them out. Stop being ignorant.
Okay, people need to know that there's a difference between having dreaded hair and having dreadlocks. Dreadlocks are purposely patterned dreaded hair. It's made by people, like it's human-made dreaded hair. Just having dreaded hair does not mean they're dreadlocks. And most people, most cultures have had dreaded hair, and some have had legitimate dreadlocks, like some Indian cultures and even Celtic and Germanic cultures have had that. But the only notion that Vikings had dreadlocks comes from the description by Romans of the Vikings as having rope-like or snake-like hair. And you know what else can be considered rope or snake-like hair? Braids, specifically matted braids. Because when the Vikings go to Rome from all the way up in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, they have to take a route that goes all the way across and back and under down to Italy. And when they are on those trips, they don't brush their hair all the time. And then their braids that they have, or their hair, can get matted and then become rope or snake-like. Just like when I wear a hoodie for a day and have the hood down, my hair in the back of my head will get matted because I have fine hair, and that's what happens to fine hair if it's not taken care of. So it's not dreadlocks, and there is no proof that they had dreadlocks. So if you wanna say that, oh, I can have dreadlocks because Viking had dreadlocks, that's just wrong, because there is no proof that they had it, and the only notion that they had it is from a description of Romans that could be interpreted in a lot of ways. Just like this is also accounted by the Romans as snake or rope-like hair like these. But these are braids. These are not dreadlocks. So, like, the description as rope and snake-like can be a lot of things. It can be dreadlocks, but it doesn't have to be. And there is no proof saying that it has to be dreadlocks. So it's really, you should be careful saying that, oh, they had dreadlocks, you know? And I think people that say that, oh, I'm just having dreadlocks to connect with my culture is just kind of weird. And then if the only thing you connect with, like, your ancestry is having dreadlocks, then you're not connected with your ancestry. And if you're so, like, on about having things that your ancestry, then file down your teeth. You know what Vikings did? They filed down their teeth to straight lines, because that's something they adopted from like South American cultures when they were over in America. So if you so bad want to connect, why don't you do that? No one will stop you from doing that. But you know that there's a lot of hate towards Black people for having dreadlocks, so you want to do that, and that's just kind of wrong. If you want to connect with the culture, why don't you connect with the culture's part that's, like, actually proven to be and can be proved to have been part of that culture's. Dreadlocks are not a proven part of Viking culture, it's just speculated. Like, it could be true, but it doesn't have to be. So why do you want it?